bring to you this beautiful literary evening featuring insightful conversation with the renowned author Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan, discussing her latest work, Good Innings, The Extraordinary Ordinary Life of Lily Tharoor. We're extremely sorry for the delay in starting this as our moderator is fighting the traffic, as I shared earlier. Before we start the event, a few housekeeping announcements for everyone. Please do not climb or walk on the stairs and avoid movements during the program. There are emergency exit doors on your left and right. The Head of Financial Control for British Council India to deliver the welcome address.
The absolute pleasure to welcome you to the British Council this evening. We are delighted to have such a vibrant audience join us for this special event. A warm welcome to Shobha Tharoor Srinivasan, the brilliant author whose talent has brought us the inspiring story we celebrate tonight. Shobha's ability to weave words into such a powerful narrative makes this evening truly extraordinary. We are equally honored to welcome Lily Tharoor, the incredible individual at the heart of this book. Lily's remarkable journey and life story are a source of inspiration, and it is a privilege to have you with us this evening. And finally, a special welcome to Ekta Kumar. She'll be joining us soon, a journalist of lived experiences. The conversation promises to be insightful, inspiring, and memorable as Shobha and Ekta bring these stories to life. I would like to thank all of you for joining us tonight and making this event a celebration of literature, creativity, and shared inspiration. I hope you enjoy the conversation, engage with the ideas presented, and leave here inspired. Thank you, and
Srinivasan, a multifaceted talent and a true storyteller at heart. Shobha, please join us on stage. Shobha is an award-winning voiceover artist, poet, editor, and author of a dozen works of fiction and non-fiction. Her illustrious career includes winning the 68th National Film Award for Best Narration Voiceover for the film Rhapsody of Rains, Monsoons of Kerala in 2022. Her children's book, including Indie Alphabet, Prince with a Paintbrush, the story of Raja Ravi Verma, and It's Time to Rhyme, have captivated young readers from both India and the United States. Her first book for adults, Good Innings, that we are celebrating today, is already making waves and is being translated into Malayalam. Beyond her creative work, Shobha has spent almost 2 decades as an advocate and fundraiser for persons with disabilities, reflecting her deep commitment to social impact. Whether through words, voice, or actions, Shobha's passion for storytelling and advocacy continues to inspire audiences worldwide. Now, talking about Ekta, whom we are struggling to get into the theatre very, very soon. As the National President for Gender Lens Investing at Wiki, championing women entrepreneurs and advocating the gender parity in business. Beyond her written work, Ekta is an accomplished artist whose creative expressions have been exhibited at the Pune Biennale alongside global talents. Both Shobha and Ekta exemplify the power of words, creativity, and advocacy in transforming lives and perspectives. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in warmly welcoming Shobha Tharoor and Ekta on stage.
It's my mother. She's not here, but I can sense her very disapproving look, because all my life, my mother's been looking at the clock to say 1 minute late, half a minute late, 2 minutes late. So it's absolutely unpardonable that I've had to rush in here today like this. So thank you all, really. I have to start with saying I really appreciate the fact that all of you made the effort to be here today, and just want to begin by saying thank you, really. Thank you for coming, and sorry. Shobha kind of wrote to me to say, would you like to moderate this session? And, my reply immediately was yes, absolutely yes. And I had 2 reasons for that. The first was that speaking to Shobha is always interesting. I mean, we've spoken one-on-one, we've also spoken off stage, on stage, and she has this rare combination, she is intelligent, she is opinionated, and she is expressive. which really means that she's smart enough to understand what's happening. She's brave enough to have a take on it, and as we all know, she has a way with words. So it's always fun to talk to you, Shobha. Always look forward to it. However, my second reason in this case is more important, which is the subject that we're discussing today. We're talking about a relationship that is so fundamental, right? It's so important, it's so basic, so primal, and yet it is often incredibly complex. We're talking about mothers, and I should just go on with the first question. Is there something that you'd like to say, or I'm going to have a...
Well, I was going to do a little apology as well. As Ekta said, quite clearly, we're really very... You know, there are so many competing events. I have myself gone to a number of book events this week. So this is the season of books and conversations in Delhi, and I am really grateful and feel privileged that you've all made the time to come out.
It's a full auditorium in the sense it's full of admiration.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate your presence here.
And for good reason, you know. When I picked up the book, we should go straight into it, actually. I was wondering what my first question should be. And in my head, when I picked up the book, the first line keeps coming back to me. So, you know, when you read the book, you say it's a book about her mother, and you expect something, you know, it's mother and daughter and all of that. And you open the book, and the first line that she writes is, my father was tall and handsome. So I want to ask you, that's my first question. Are you playing with us?
Not playing with you. The book is a very particular book. I was commissioned to write a biography about my mother. I think I've said that in the author's note. The book was meant to be something that follows a particular timeline, start to finish, you know, like a traditional biography. Well, I tend to do things a little differently. I wanted this book to be a tribute to my mother, who is in the audience, who is still around, as well as a tribute to women everywhere. You know, so often, about 80% of biographies written are about men, and usually written by men. To have the privilege and the opportunity to speak about my mother and share her story, which is a story that probably resonates with many of you in the auditorium. This is a story of women in so many parts of the world. My mother was born before independence in India and was part of the diaspora from small towns that sort of went out and made a journey and a life for herself. And I know that there are many others, your mothers perhaps, or yourselves, have had that opportunity to explore and learn and go out. And so this book is really a tribute to everyone, all other mothers, women, daughters, as both sort of memoir and self-help in some ways. And the reason I say self-help is there's a quotation from every book, in a sense, is self-help, because we learn something from it. So in some ways, this is a book that is a collection of vignettes. And that first line in the first chapter is presented, I've written the book in an unusual way, without ventriloquizing my mother. The book is written in first person in the beginning of the chapter, and then in third person as the sort of omniscient narrator. This book opens with my mother's reflection of her father. She was her father's pet. She was the firstborn in her home. She was beloved of her father. He built a house. He was he was a history and geography teacher in the village. He had, you know, she was very proud of the fact that he read National Geographic, and maybe even Reader's Digest that came to the house in those days, to the village from far away, from America and England. The books would come, or the magazines would come, and people would come and sort of borrow informally if they knew the language. And very often he was a scribe doing English letters for people who couldn't write the language. So, you know, the book begins with her pride of him, but also the sort of confidence that came out of her life, because as a firstborn, and because his house, he built a house, I mean, all that is in the book, called Lily Cottage, and he always called her Lily, even though the name at birth was Sulekha. That's her name on her birth certificate, which, as she always says, is sort of ironical, because, you know, Sulekha means good script, and Mummy had the worst handwriting. But she was called Lily by her father. And so the book begins with her reflection of her father and that pride of possession in the home.
You spoke about English, Shobha, and I read a line in the book where your mother says, when she went to London, and she says, and I didn't know English, and I did a double take because, we all know Shashi Tharoor, who's known for impeccable English, and you, of course. And so when I read that line, I did a double take, and then you read further and you realize that she had the grit and determination to say, I'm going to learn this on my own, and actually use the radio to do that. Would you tell us
Yes,
that?
absolutely, yeah. Well, what's interesting is, we all learnt English in school, I'm sure, in India in those days, but it was not spoken English, right? So that is part of the problem. And when she went off to London, though she wasn't meant to, that's also in the book, is that she arrived there, she was a new mother. You can't really travel around the city without having some English language skills. She used to listen to Roy Plumley's Desert Island Discs. I don't know if any of you have ever heard Desert Island Discs. You have, that's wonderful. It's one of my favorite shows and I still listen to it. Of course, we've had different anchors over the years. But Desert Island Discs, there was a time, and I don't know if Mum can still do it, but I can't, the signature tune and the first language would say, this is the story of da-da-da-da-da, and there's where they'd introduce the program. She used to sort of tell us that thing by heart. That's how she sort of learned the language. And so very often her English was peppered with very British sayings like, whatever you can do, I can do better. When she used to tease my father. Or I've had good innings, which, by the way, is the title of this book. If you ask Mom, how's it going? She always said, I've had good innings when you say what's happening in life. And my brother said, well, she doesn't really like cricket, so this doesn't seem like an appropriate title. And I said, it's what she says all the time. If you tell her how are things going, she says, I've had good innings. So it's the way she has learnt it. And as some reviewer once said, her life has been full of googlies. It's wonderful.
That's cricket too again. But from there to actually, you were mentioning a couple of days ago that she reads 5 newspapers a day. She's read Veer Sangve's autobiography and someone else's, and from there to actually make the journey to who she is today. And there was a thought that struck me. I don't know if you've seen, there was a very cute picture of your brother and a monkey reading the newspaper a couple of days ago. And my head, I was thinking, even monkeys begin to read if you're sitting in your backyard where you are.
Yes, that's true. That got tweeted and went sort of viral. And it is a true thing. I was there in the garden when the monkey chose to climb on my brother's lap and took a nap on my brother. It's the truth.
But did you also, your reading and your writing as an author, how much of it was influenced by your mother?
I want to give some credit to my father as well. My mother was quite an exacting mother. She was, as my brother once dedicated, full of divine discontent. So we were always working to receive her approval. But it came with the best sort of intention. And that was that she saw the talent, she saw the spark, she just wanted us to do more. My father, on the other hand, was excited about everything we did. So in some ways, my writing career took off and I suppose began when I was a child. And I wrote a little story about rabbits that my father sent off to, I think, the junior section of the Hindustan Times, or I don't remember which newspaper it was, but I think there's a junior section on the Sunday where children get published. And I got published. Once you see a byline, it's a bit addictive. So some of that was, we have to give Dad some credit for that.
But you had the best of both worlds, right? Your mother sent you to win the Miss Calcutta pageant, and your father sent you to write. So you kind of had a good mix. Did you feel the pressure as well?
Well, I didn't really feel pressured because I think my brother answered all the parent dreams. As all parents in this auditorium might say, as long as you have one child who's sort of fulfilling all those ambitions of the parents, the others get off scot-free. But I had my own ambitions, and so we survived.
You use the word ambition, Shobha, and very often when it comes to women, that word tends to have a bit of a negative connotation. It's very hard to justify ambition, and there is this need to justify ambition in women. When you read the book, your mother, again, you use that term divine discontent that Mr. Tharoor did. It's just so wonderful to have a woman who's pushing herself to know more, to do more, to be more, to see more.
I'd like to read a little section of the book, if I may, because in some ways the book the book really shows why a person becomes the way they do. And, you know, from being the firstborn in a small village to having the life experience of going abroad when you've never had a passport before in your life, to moving cities, to raising children, to, I mean, these are all opportunities that many people have, but Mum took it with both hands, and she was always had a little bit of an insecurity because my father was a heart patient, so that's all described in here as well. And I think when in some ways is sort of a little, it's like a, it's the essence of what made things happen.
So what bit are you reading? Give us
Let me just see what I'll start with. 1 second. And the book begins, each chapter has, in some ways, chapter headings that are sort of the thesis of the chapter, but I also use aphorisms. It's written in simple, propulsive prose to sort of mirror the way my mother writes or thinks. And the quote, the aphorism in the beginning of this chapter says, "You have to take risks. We will only understand the miracle of life fully when we allow the unexpected to happen." And it's a Paulo Coelho quote, which is a very lovely quote. And I'm going to read the first part of the chapter, which is in my mother's voice. I mean, I've written it, but it's in first person, and it's in some ways her reflection. "I left the sheltered life of a small town in Kerala for the big city of Calcutta soon after my wedding. It was a time of anticipation, the newness of a man and a marriage, and the excitement of not knowing what would happen in the days ahead. But within a week of my arrival in the city, my husband announced that his former boss had written him a letter offering him a better position in London. What a surprising twist of fate. Chandran was excited, but I at first was confused. The maidservant would have to be sent back to Kerala, and we had to apply for a passport for me since I'd never had one. But Chandran reassured me. He was always one for positive thinking. He converted the first-class plane tickets sent to him by his employer into 2 economy tickets for a flight to London. We used the extra money for winter clothes that we knew we would soon need. I feel that this surprising and sudden turn of events marked the beginning of the unusual life that I would continue to live for the coming years. In many ways, took a lifetime to make and create. It is from my own, it is in some ways jointly creative. It's put together by my memories and my conversations with my mother. So it may be her voice, but I'm not attempting to ventriloquize her.
Your daughter uses the term co-creative. I love that, a co-creative project between the both of you. It's such a wonderful way to bring the lives together. Exactly. But coming back, I still want to ask that it is hard to kind of write in your mother's voice. Did you ever doubt yourself as to where you, how did you set, because it's quite distinct when you write in terms of structure, it's hard to do, to keep changing. How did you manage that?
Well, my daughter was an academic who's written an epilogue in the book, calls it speaking nearby, which means you're not exactly using the way she would speak. Her style of speaking may be different, but it is the way that we learned how she imagined things and what she learned out of experiences. So, you know, as I had the good fortune of being the one child who gave her a daughter as well, a granddaughter. My brother has 2 boys, my sister has 3 boys, and my daughter is the only girl in the home. And you know, Mummy used to come and visit us very, very often in America, especially after my father passed away. So we had the benefit of her conversation, of her memories, of her stories, in some ways more than some of the others. So in that sense, I was probably the ideal person to write the book, and therefore I never felt intimidated by being able to speak her language.
In fact, I was just coming to that. At some point, your daughter was supposed to write it, but the book came to you. It just came.
Well, that was, we sort of laughed about it because, you know, when Shashi came into politics in India, there were many people who wanted biographies written about my mother, and there were people coming to her, to my mother, and visiting and saying, "Can we write your story?" And it never really happened, and we didn't really want it to happen because we weren't quite sure what sort of voice they were going to take, what aspect were they going to concentrate on. My mother's is not exactly a rags to riches story, what story are they going to say? And in some ways, I suppose I was the right person to do the story.
Absolutely. There are these small attention to detail. Like you mentioned her life in London, and there's this bit I loved. It's so romantic in some sense, where they walked in Trafalgar Square and fed the pigeons and then went to the cinema. And there is a bit where you mentioned they bought fish and chips, and the fact that your mother noticed that the oil got absorbed by the newspaper. I read that and I smiled to say, it's things like this that make her story come alive.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can you tell us something that's not in the book?
It's not in the book.
Something that you probably thought of putting that you...
One of the things I suppose I should say is that, unfortunately, the book is more of an aide memoir at the moment for my mother. And I'm so grateful that she's here to share this evening with us. And she really did want to be here to share the evening with us. But there are some of the stories that are not something that she quite remembers anymore. And so in some ways, I really do feel the privilege of having had the opportunity to write them.
Because she said that, I have to say this. There is a part in the book where you mentioned how timing is so important. When she was playing Housie and she lost...
Yes, absolutely. There's a description of their sea passage back to India in those days. I mean, for me too, this was such an incredible discovery of all. And honestly, as I said, I do see this book as a tribute to women everywhere. It's not merely a tribute to my mother. It is everyone's story, and I've taken this story and this book to many parts of India where people have come to me and said that they want their daughters to read it, or they've said, my mother was exactly like this, or they've said, I feel like my story has been shared. And so it's really a good feeling as a writer when you've written something that resonates so deeply with so many people. And I've had men come to me in the auditorium saying, you wrote my mother's story, thank you. Truly.
I can again sense my mother saying, Ekta, what's wrong with you? But really, and that is my way of saying
thank you for coming the long distance.
But what's the difference in how you perceive her and how he perceives her? And is there a disconnect?
Well, yes, I think it's, I can honestly say, because he's written about it as well, that my brother, when he was growing up, felt that that my mother tended to favor the daughters and not him, which does happen sometimes in South Indian households. We don't see it as often in some of the others. He, on the other hand, over the years, they've developed a very good relationship, and he has said what a privilege it is for him to have her live with him now. And it's not something, curiously, my mother renewed her driving license at the age of 82. She was entirely independent, lived on her own in Cochin in her flat, which we've still locked up and hasn't, it hasn't gone anywhere. It's got all her things in it. She came here, she came on a vacation, a family vacation that we had abroad with my brother, and I brought her back to India because once she crossed 80, she said, well, now you'll have to, all of you have to come travel with me. I'm tired of traveling alone. So that was the only concession we made, but she was always doing everything on her own. When she came back, unfortunately, which was the 2020 January is when she came back to, 2020 February is when she came back to India. In March, on March 14th, she was booked to fly back to Cochin. I had just left on the 8th from Delhi myself, and Mummy, on the day she was supposed to fly, my brother said, the cases in Kerala of COVID is too much, we're not going to let you go, and literally tore up her ticket, and she stayed on. And then we had a lockdown. Do you remember? In 2020, there was a lockdown. My sister, who had visited from London, was also stuck in Delhi. And so they had a merry, I shouldn't call it merry, but they had a lockdown together. My sister from London, who couldn't go back home, my mother, who couldn't go back to her place. And then over the, since 2020, she's gone back a few times, but I think she'd rather be with my brother now, and that's been really wonderful for us as well, because when we come to be with her, we also get to spend some time with him.
with my brother and I, we've decided we have different mothers, and we don't fight anymore.
Well, I think
Because
children
it's-
tend to remember their childhood differently as well. I'm sure my son is not in the audience, but I used to laugh saying my son is probably going to write a misery memoir, whereas my daughter might write something very different. So, we have children who truly remember the same childhood so differently. My brother remembers his childhood in very stark terms that I don't need to go into, and my sister and I remember it as this incredible childhood. So I think, the pressures of a firstborn, perhaps being the boy, my mother perhaps being reliant on him after my father passed away in terms of a certain kind of, not reliant on him in terms of finance or even economics, but reliant on him in terms of having to take on a particular role of being something. Because she said to me a very interesting comment once when in India, unfortunately, but of my mother's generation, a lot of women are tied to either their husbands or their sons. And my mother did it entirely on her own. And that is, it's all these expressions of admiration that I wanted to share in this book. So this is a book that really needed to be written by me.
There was this instant, what got me in the book really was when she was very young. Her father, I believe, would take her to, as a treat, would take her in a taxi to visit the temple, and then they would go to see Kathakali performances. And she chose to learn the dance, despite Kathakali really being, more often than not, being performed by men. And in those days, in that age, she said, no, I want to learn something like that. So clearly she was not ordinary by any standard.
Absolutely not,
So
exactly.
I'm not surprised that, so as a daughter, was that hard to follow? Did you feel the pressure to kind of constantly live up to
No,
her?
she was a larger-than-life person. I still remember that in Kolkata when it rained, and I have my classmate here from Cal as well, the roads would get flooded. And on our way to school, we would be told, just as we were coming close to Loreto House, Middleton Row, that school is closed today because you can't access it. So, we had this sort of energy of, almost like a Pavlovian response, like the dogs, whenever it rained, we used to get excited. Unlike many people who don't enjoy it, I still love it.
I went to Loreto House,
Middleton
Row, and yes, every time there's rain, I'm like, oh my God, it's a holiday, we can wait.
Exactly. Well, but my mother would tell us, supposing it was a holiday and we had a few extra hours, she'd say, well, let's go see this movie that you wanted to see. And my father would say, the roads are blocked, don't go, etc., etc. The car and driver would be there, and mummy would get in the car with us, and she used to mostly wear saris, and my sister and I would be in the car. Shashi was always so grown up and sort of out of our life in that sense, that he wrote a book and dedicated to his sisters for never going to the movies with them. But what I was going to say is my mother would get in the car, we would go, and just as my father would very cautiously say, the car is going to get stuck, the car would get stuck. But did my mother disappoint us? Never. She would hitch up her sari, hold our hands, we would wade through the water, but we would see that movie that was promised. That is a memory that I will always, I used to tell my children that story, So yes, call it a risk taker, call it whatever you will. And I'll tell you one more thing. You said, tell me something that's not in the book. When I was growing up, maybe that's why I wrote the book as well. When I was growing up, very often I was told with exasperation by my father, you're just like your mother. It wasn't necessarily said as a compliment. I wore it as a mantle of pride. And I feel that, because we did things perhaps that maybe others didn't do. We broke rules. We bent some rules perhaps, or we were hitched up saris and did what we had promised. I wanted to be that kind of mother for my children.
In fact, again, to go back to your mother, when she was very young in school or college, I believe even in those days, she was bold enough to be different from the others, to take... However, as daughters, okay, this is a generic question, not on your mother necessarily, but as a daughter, for me, for example, there's a certain thrill in rebelling, right? Being different from your mother. My mother and I are opposites in most ways, and I like that because as a child, when you're growing up, it gives you a sense of, I'm making my own place in the world, right? But as you grow older, I realize I can't run away from her. The fact is, I'll have somebody come and say, oh, you have Nilima's eyes, or oh, your Begun Bhaja is like your mom, or I find myself reacting like her.
Correct.
So at the end of it, I mean, we seem to come back to them in some way. So I want to ask you, what are the parts that you like? What are the parts that you don't like?
It's a very good question. Well, my mother did not have pride in running a good home. She was too ambitious to be doing that. And luckily, she grew up, or she had the benefit because of my father's position, to live a life where she had the support, the staff support in India, to do things without having to really get her hands dirty. She's an exceptional cook on many levels, but you'd have to clean for 3 hours if she cooked in your kitchen. I told myself when I went to the US that I would be a brilliant student and win awards, but I will also try to do things properly at home. And so, in a sense, it's a sort of change. I believe that, it's important that whatever you do well. And that was in some ways not necessarily my mother's mantra. She really did not respect certain kinds of domestic duties. She thought it was, someone else can do it, let me do something else.
If I can take that thought a little further.
And for her generation, that was unusual.
Yeah.
And if I can take that thought a little further, in fact, you say this
Sure.
is strange because I'm actually, I was writing something on this just a couple of days ago, saying
Right.
how does domestic duties, as it's put, in some way, do we rebel against not doing it, also as a way to assert that we are individuals and not...
Absolutely. For her generation and for her time, I think that was the purpose of her rebellion. For me, in a sense, I needed to prove that you can be a good cook and yet be a scholar or a writer or something else. I enjoyed nourishing my children, preparing meals, the idea of a communal gathering around a table, conversations around it. So, why not?
You mentioned at some point, right?
And now I don't have time much to cook, but I have done a lot of it.
I was going to say there's Blinkit, but I'm not going that way.
Okay.
The thing is, as motherhood can, when you say mother, more often than not, there are words like love and sacrifice that come to the forefront, and I hate that because it's such a myopic way of looking at motherhood. With this book, in some sense, you kind of open that mold a little bit as well. Yes, of course, love, and yes, of course, sacrifice, but motherhood is so much more than that, right? Because you're an individual as well.
Absolutely. There's a very beautiful few lines that I was going to read it right at the end. It's not something that I've written, but there's an incredible American poet who passed away this week, well, a few days ago. This is a new week, Nikki Giovanni, and she was an activist, a feminist, an African-American writer, but there's just a few lines from a poem, and I just want to share that with you because I think all of you will get something out of it. And it's about quiet revolutions. And so, many women in different ways wage quiet revolutions without having to go out there and pick up arms, right? So it's an answer to what you just said. And let me just read that to you. To dream radical dreams of blowing everyone away with my perceptive powers of correct analysis. I even used to think I'd be the one to stop the riot and negotiate the peace. Then I awoke and dug that if I dreamed natural dreams of being a natural woman, doing what a woman does when she's natural, I would have a revolution. Beautifully, thank you. Yeah, I read things like this and then I remember that's what my mother is, and that's what so many of our mothers are, truly. And I think we don't take the time sometimes to acknowledge that.
And with women, there is this paradox that is strange, especially with mothers. They're invisible in some sense, right? You call them shadows of successful men. You keep saying that. They're invisible, but they're also indispensable. It's such a paradox. It's both. So we're constantly kind of battling that and also trying to assert who we are. Because you spoke about a poet, I don't remember the lines, I don't have them with me, but Sylvia Plath I just say the lines, it's not exact, but she spoke about wanting to walk in open fields and wanting to sleep on the beach and wanting to experience all the colors of life, and yet being horribly limited by motherhood. And when you read that, you realize that is also a facet of motherhood that we don't talk about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is also real. Sometimes, as profound as giving birth is and raising children is, and as lovely as it is also exhausting. It is also hard. It is also demanding. It is fulfilling.
And to give voice to that is so important. Today, of course, we have enough literature where people talk about it. But so many times, especially in the generation that my mother was a part of, you sort of silently went through it, right? If you ask her, how are things going, how's your life, what's happening? Oh, I've had good innings, meaning my life has been good so far, is how she sees it. It is true that, for those of you who want to know, because I told him I've got this book coming out, and he said, but Mommy doesn't even like cricket, why have you written good innings? I said, because it's a language that she uses. So good innings,
I noticed was, I don't know, it's a beautiful cover, right? And it is a soothing turquoise, beautiful blue, and it has this red dot as the bindi on the photograph. And I looked at it and I said, this is so, in some sense, visually, after reading the book, I came back to the cover and said, this is just, it kind of fits in so beautifully, because in all that calm and all of that, we have to remember there is the flash of passion, and there has to be that red dot somewhere on all our heads, Not true, or did Penguin give it to you and say no to this?
No. I furnished all the photographs in the book, and they're just from our own personal collection, so they're not high-res things sort of resurrected from wherever, because I thought this is the kind of story that lends itself to some family photographs as well, and this was...
No, I should come to difficult questions, darling. What was the...
Preparing to fail, those are aphorisms. That is her thinking. That is how she always sort of made us do things.
And in my head, when I read that, I thought it was actually well done, because you have all the greats of the world. You have Kalam and Kamu and Tharoor.
But we also had her favorites, and my mother was a voracious reader. She doesn't read quite as much anymore. She reads the newspapers, but not that much anymore. But until recently, she loved biographies as she got older. And she's read them all, and she would get in touch with the authors. I remember that she got in touch with the author who wrote the story about Mahatma Gandhi's wife. And she was so in awe of that book, and she said, finally somebody said her story. That was so important. And she told my brother, can you get me the name of the author? I want to talk to her, I want to meet her, I want to write to her. And this is how Mummy was. I mean, she read Veer Sangvi's biography, which I haven't read, which I know only came out in the last couple of years. Malika Sarabai's autobiography, Dipti novels, all of that. She loved reading about life stories. She said there's a lesson to be learned in everybody's life. So in some ways, this book is also a testament to that, isn't it?
And you've spoken about the fact that you had a number of people who've come to you in all the events that you've done, who've come and said that something in the book resonates with me and something I see. Can you tell us about somebody who came up with a distinct example, of shared something about their lives? Would you remember? Or if they can be someone in the audience. Would you like to share something about, yes?
Okay, do you want to say something about all of us? Bring the mic a little closer, darling.
What do I say? You are all making me proud and doing the right things, and what else
Thank
to
you.
say? Beg your pardon?
I said thank you, darling.
So, and of course, my son is a world figure now. He has made me so proud, and all my children, all the three of them, are all very good children, and I feel I have brought them up very well, and I got the reward also. Thank you.
Wow,
Thank you.
great.
To say, what is it that your mother gave you that shaped who you are? Don't say love, because that is taken for granted. What's the one thing?
I think I can't say it in one word, but I think one of the most admirable qualities of my mother is that it doesn't matter what the adversity, she picks herself up. And I think that has really sort of been imbued in my sensibilities as well, that nothing is ever that bad. She's not someone who feels sorry for herself. She lost her husband at a young age. She built her own financial strength after that. She's done so much on her own. Instead of sort of feeling sorry for herself, she picked herself up by the bootstraps. So for me, that is her best quality, truly. Apart from the love and affection, it's true that, you know, when we were growing up, we did feel we could never make her happy. At least my brother felt that way. I think I made her happy quite often. Just joking, because I was a good little girl then. But the reality is that she was. She constantly wanted us to be doing things that we weren't necessarily ready to do. I mean, these beauty pageants and all that were not our cup of tea, but she was ready for us to do everything.
I'm going to just ask one difficult question, just to wrap it
Sure.
up, because you used the word good,
Yeah.
you know, there. With mothers, very often, again, do we want good mothers? Is that desirable? Or
Good
do we
mothers.
want, or do we want mothers to be real and flawed? Because truly, that is how we are stronger and better.
Absolutely, and my mother was real and flawed, but she had incredibly good qualities. Good is the wrong word. She had many admirable qualities. She, as I said, you know, you see many women of her generation, of that age, sort of retiring into nothingness when they lose a partner, a long-term partner. My mother didn't. She came into her own in some ways because she no longer had that sort of steady figure in her life. And for any other woman, that's something to learn from.
And I think this is what resonates when, because as young mothers, especially, you told me a lot of young mothers come up and speak to you.
Yeah.
I think we all suffer from this guilt overhang that we're not doing enough and we're not good enough and we're, you know, slipping.
But that's partly the Catholic guilt from going to convent schools. Honestly, it is. I can't blame my mother for that.
That's a global phenomenon. This
I don't want to blame my mother for that part, but you're absolutely right. My mother, you know, told my daughter, no, I shouldn't even say that, but you said some story. She came to America and she told my young teenage daughter, you don't need to get married. In my generation, women got married because through their husbands they had the opportunity to explore the world or live a different life. She said, you're smarter than any boy. You can go out and live on your own. It, you know, it ended up, I mean, and that was in some ways such an incredible feminist, activist kind of statement from a mother of a particular generation, you know, was born when we go that, and it's nothing again unique. I'm not saying anything all that brilliant, but honestly, unless you read and read widely and read outside of the classroom, read beyond what your school teachers want you to read, and of course for adults, read the kind of books that appeal to you. If it's fantasy, that's fine. There's nothing that says one has to read particular kind of books to learn how to be a good writer. There are many people who want to write who essentially read only graphic novels. As children, there are many who start out reading comics. Once you discover the love of reading, reading really informs the writing process. I confess that I haven't read as many children's books as I should, because right now I have enough ideas that I want to share. If I was looking for a particular craft, I would read more of those particular children's books. I mean, children's books is a huge, large sort of genre of writing, and I have written many kinds of children's books, from picture books to illustrated biographies to a poetry book to short stories, you know, all kinds of things. So reading within that area will sort of inform a little bit new ideas of how to frame stories, how to write the narrative, etc. So that's my only real advice. Keep doing it and it'll happen. The creativity, the more it forms. Met an ant, and an ant met Anne. Hello, said the ant. Hello, little man. We were all taught how to enunciate, and every letter needed to be sounded. And I particularly enjoyed it, so I sort of, it became part of my life. We just had the benefit, I think, of those days of learning English from people who took it very seriously and wanted us to know how to pronounce each word correctly.
Is
That's
there time
part of
to
it.
read another quick passage? I'm not sure.
Treasury Building was the Bombay branch office building of the Hindu newspaper, and was a well-known landmark. Located near Churchgate Station, it was at the heart of the city. The City Beacon, LIC building, was opposite, and Bank House, where author and poet Kamala Das lived, was only a short walk away. Lily and Chandran were surrounded by interesting and kind neighbours who were warm and welcoming. They had company when they wanted to socialize, and the support and friendship of people in a new city was a blessing. Chandran loved the vibrant energy of Bombay and thrived in his new position. I'm going to skip a little and read a little bit more. Lily enjoyed dressing up, adopting new fashions and trying new hairstyles. She remembered that she wore a sleeveless sari blouse with trousers on one occasion and turned heads at the club. Someone asked her sarcastically if she was starting a new fashion. She may have protested at the question when it was asked, but soon she noticed other women adopting the sartorial style. Lily was a trendsetter. She had an inner confidence that told her that she was quite special and exceptional. So I sort of do each chapter in that way.
By myself, and thank you today. I'm not a good cook. I also end up, messing my kitchen. So it's as children in our the way we are, our mentality or the way we are.
They were infallible. We grew up knowing that life was sort of messy, that things could go wrong, but yet we saw these incredible qualities that we looked up to. So we were always told, I remember even if my mother and father had a spat and we happened to hear it, which, and today in America they say, you don't air certain things in front of children, or you shouldn't have a disagreement. We heard disagreements when we were growing up. And then my father would say, I hope it's been a learning experience for you about the kind of communication that sometimes can cause hurt. And so I think we learned knowing that none of us are perfect, that there is something that doesn't matter if you're not. There is still a lot of learning that can happen.
Your daughter.
Raising my children, I was at home and my husband went to work, which is not the way my parents had raised me. And my mother would visit and say, you went on a scholarship to America, and she saw it because I told you her disdain for domestic. She says, you're watching children and washing dishes. And I remember how much that sort of made me feel less than in those days. But I truly believe that what we share with our children and how we raise them really inform what they become as adults. And I have very exceptional children, I like to think, not because of me, despite me, but they're doing well in life. And I don't regret now, because I did work after that I spent those 7 years at home. Despite the fact that, I know my mother in those days was not admiring of it at all, because she always felt that she never had some of the opportunities that we had, going to the schools we did, the education we had, going abroad with a scholarship as an undergraduate, which was very rare in those days, then doing graduate school, etc. And she said, I didn't have all of that, and so I wasn't able to do certain things you did and you still haven't,
And to add to that, I think in the book somewhere you mentioned that she uses the line, just playfully, that whatever you can do, I do better.
Right.
And I looked at it, and with my sons, I keep doing that. We have this arm wrestling thing where they're very young, so they lose, and I keep, I can beat you, and I can beat you, and somewhere, they grow old enough to then be able to beat you, and then they grow old enough to now let you win. And sometimes that's how, as mothers, you push your children in various ways, right?
Absolutely. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I was a different mother than my mother was, but I think a lot of the need to sort of make use of time is definitely for my mom, and it's true that today she says, I regret in some ways that she used this. It's not my line, and maybe she won't say it again now, but she has said it even as recently as a few years ago. I think I pushed my children too much. They don't know how to take it easy. And maybe my children will say the same of me. You'll have to ask them. We all make connections by telling stories, either around the dining table or in our classroom or with our friends, or like we are doing on the table or through our books. And as a voiceover talent, that's exactly what I've done. I've used the power of my voice to tell stories. I use the power of words to tell stories when I write. Motivating, children or anybody that you teach. Essentially, there's nothing that none of us can do. We're all special in different ways. We all have our own talents, and I think being honest to ourselves is all that we can be. If our particular talent is in poetry, then that's what we should write, and we shouldn't force ourselves to write prose. If, on the other hand, we feel that we can do both, we should. I honestly feel that in both the voiceover work as well as in the writing, or as well as in the communication, the only thing that we can call on is our inner selves and our own honesties. So if we are true to who we are, then it just comes, honestly.
Is about a parent-child relationship that we have, sometimes we have friction with our parents sometimes, right? We argue against them, we rebel, and we don't get their point of view. We think, their thinking is a bit old-fashioned and a pebble of past or something towards their point of view. So
I do indeed. I remember that I was academic, but it's something that I also always wanted to be. And my mother was especially, she was sort of susceptible to the whole Indian notion that, modeling in film and that kind of thing. After, especially, because of my father's multiple heart attacks, she felt that somehow there was sort of some financial ability if you have girls who look a particular way or people who are articulate. She thought that joining that kind of industry would give us an open chance to sort of succeed and do well. And we bristled against it. So, I did join, and I was Miss Calcutta years and years ago, but it's not something that I wanted to leverage into becoming anything else. So when we got opportunities to model or movies or whatever, I said, no, that's not what I want to do. I'd rather go to America on a scholarship and study. And so I never took her word seriously. As I grew older and I became, I'm much older now, I used to laugh and I tell other friends, hey, why can't you do both? I should have modeled and made lots of money, as well as gone to America and done a scholarship. So that's just the example that, some of the things that your parents have that wisdom to share with you. I mean, this is sort of a trivial subject perhaps, but it resonated with me later in life where I thought, why not? You can do it all, right?
In fact, we should do a quick poll in the audience to say, how many of us with passing years do you feel yourself becoming your parents? Would you put your hand up? How many? Whether you like, honestly.
Madam Lily Tharoor with us. Thank you so much for being present here. I think your presence made all the difference to this conversation here today. Of course, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Shobha for putting this dedication that brought this event to life. Shobha, your passion and commitment are true driving force behind tonight's event. I would also like to extend my sincere gratitude to Ekta. Ekta, your insights, your perspectives have enriched this discussion and sparked meaningful conversations, leaving us with something that all of us can go back and reflect on. A special thanks to our partner Penguin, whose support made this event possible. Your contributions are invaluable.
It was so nice meeting you.
In case you can't do us on stage, a few would be nice. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. This piece is gorgeous.
Thank you.
That's why you have gorgeous children.